Good morning. Welcome to the Cyberseer 2019 Cybersecurity Review. During this next 20 minutes, we're going to look at some of the cyber breaches that made the headlines in 2019 and look at how those events played out against our cyber predictions for 2019. We'll also provide some insights into what we'll be predicting for 2020. Joining me this morning, I've got Michael Green, one of our lead SOC analysts. Good morning, Michael.
Hello.
And of course, there's Martin Cook, Strategy Director. Thanks, Michael. So I think a good place to start is to actually take a look at what Cyberseer saw over 2019. And there's been a number of data breaches, exploits, and hacks over the last sort of 12 months that have, in the mainstream, compromised data for millions of users. But actually, if we look at what we've seen, on average, we can see here we've seen 33 incidents per customer that our team of analysts have actually identified and raised to customers. Michael, do you want to talk us through some of these and some of the interesting elements that are in there?
Yeah, so correctly, as stated on the slide, across the customer base, it has been around 33 incidents per customer. These, as looking at the graph, these range from data exfil to the more malware related stuff. So the multiple stages included in pre and post malware infections. So of these incidents throughout the year, notable ones, probably insider data theft, use of command and control for post exploitation, so that's lateral movement once a adversary has taken hold of the network. And also there's been a sharp increase in the number of Emotech related infections this year.
Okay, it's interesting that looking at the media, most high-profile attacks have been motivated by money, with indicators of some attacks being traced back to nation-state activity. In actual fact, looking at a report from Hiscox, the insurance firm, they identified that 61% of organizations reported some form of data breach in 2019, and this represents around a 16% increase over 2018. So, we're seeing a lot more attacks on there. We're seeing some that are more focused and varying across sort of on-premise and also cloud-based solutions that are there. So a really interesting mix there. If we just take a look at some of the breaches that have made sort of media headlines throughout the year, I've picked a few at random here. Going back to the beginning, looking at January, B&Q had a breach of a database that contained a list of people that were caught stealing products from B&Q stores. The document included a number of names, the items that had been stolen, and also the value of the goods and the stores that they were taken from. The database should have been accessible to only a few of those employees, but it was identified post-breach that the server that the data was on was left publicly available without any protection from passwords, authentication, or anything along those lines. Moving further into the year, looking at March, April, there was the Asus and Visual Studio. They were sort of third-party attacks. I'll allow Michael to talk to those later on. If we go into May, WhatsApp, 1.5 billion users. Surveillance technology was found on the phones of users who answered their calls within the WhatsApp app. Suspected to be the work of the NSO group, an Israeli organization who are known for their Pegasus spyware, which enables monitoring of smartphones. Interestingly, in October, WhatsApp filed a suit against NSO under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, although NSO group deny those claims going in there. July, Capital One, major headlines, a huge database breach affecting millions of credit card customers with personally identifiable information being taken there, account details, addresses, usernames, things along those lines. iPhone exploit in August. Sophisticated hacks were discovered by a cybersecurity research group within Google's Project Zero team. They announced that the iPhone that had visited certain malicious websites could be vulnerable to surveillance across the phone's entire software. This would include passwords, messages, location data, all those good things. Apple actually confirmed that the vulnerability was indeed patched within 10 days of that discovery coming through. Moving forwards, Everest MSSP hit by ransomware. The demand here was €750,000 to decrypt it. I think we've got a piece that we're going to talk to in a bit more detail on that later on as well. And a couple of other ones in there. Labour Party, suspected distributed denial of service attack. This was confirmed to have been thwarted by the party's robust security systems in there. And other ones that we have in there, cashback sites have leaked data for 3.5 million users in a theft of over 2 terabytes of personally identifiable information, again due to unprotected Elasticsearch databases that have been online for a period of time and have been found by just searching specific ports and looking what's in there. So a lot of different attacks, a lot of different compromises that we've seen through that. But actually, if we look in the round at data breaches and number of records that have been leaked per month, this is according to a source from itgovernance.co.uk, we can see around 11.2 billion data records that have been leaked to date. We compiled this at the beginning of December, which is why we don't have anything for December in there. But that's a significant amount of information, personally identifiable information that could then be sold to support other things moving forward. So a significant challenge in there. If we just move forwards and actually look at our predictions and reprise on those, we made a number of predictions at the beginning of 2019. And actually, if we go through them and look at them, GDPR, we predicted that GDPR would make a very quick example of an organization for failing to meet the minimum requirements. Prior to GDPR, the maximum fine for an organisation in the UK was £500,000, and now under GDPR, it's up to 4% of their global turnover, or 20 million, whichever one's higher. So it's a significant change. And actually, what we have seen, July this year, British Airways was issued with a fine by the Information Commissioner's Office to the sum of 183 million. That's around 1.5% of its turnover. Similarly, hotel chain Marriott could be stung for around 99 million. That's 3% of its turnover for its data breaches that were reported within the realms of GDPR. If we look at the Internet of Things, we thought that there'd be some form of legislation that would be introduced to tackle the openness in many IoT devices. It's currently estimated around 14.2 billion Internet-connected devices are in use worldwide today. Interestingly, in May this year, the UK government proposed a new law to secure IoT devices, looking at a labelling system that would tell customers how secure the IoT product was. In order to gain that label and enter the market, the IoT device would have to come up with unique passwords, state clearly how long security updates will be made available for, and offer the public a point of contact to whom any cybersecurity vulnerabilities could be disclosed. The law follows a voluntary code of practice for IoT that was published last year. It's a step forwards. It's not quite where it needs to be. And interestingly, actually, earlier this month, which the consumer testing company urged retailers to remove smart toys off of their shelves over security concerns. They reported that children are at risk of being contacted by strangers and seeing offensive images through their must-have smart toys. Security flaws in walkie-talkies, karaoke machines, robots, which could leave them open to being hacked or hijacked by other users, or online filters. A major concern in some toys testers was somebody else could actually start a two-way conversation with a child from up to 200 meters away from the toy itself. We understand that retailers are currently working with that voluntary code of practice, but hopefully see more in 2020 on that. So a partial alignment for what we see there. Thinking about the increasingly sophisticated attacks, Michael, talk us through what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so we sort of put out a prediction that we'd see an uptick in fileless malware being used. So it's obviously a quick description. It's an attack that will exist in memory and in an attempt to really thwart traditional EDR and monitoring solutions. According to reports from Trend Micro, in the first half of 2019, they actually saw an uptick of around 265% over the same period in 2018. Going back to our observations earlier, we saw a large uptick in emotet infections, and a favourite technique used by attackers is to leverage the trusted and legitimate processes that are already running on an operating system. This includes use of macros for initial infection, PowerShell to download stage 2 of the infection chain, and use of another admin tool, Windows management instrumentation for actual movement. 2019 also saw attackers using a combination of attacks to cause chaos, really, in some unsuspecting companies. So earlier on the year, a famous one, I think, or one that hit the news, was the Lockagoga ransomware. that affected a company called Norsk Hydro. It was reported to have started off with a standard phishing campaign, but once the adversaries had a hold in the network, they were able to propagate by gaining domain admin access through standard attack on Active Directory, and from there they were actually able to push out a group policy update to infect all the systems domain-wide. A more recent one in the last month or so actually was a bit of ransomware called Snatch ransomware, which used a technique whereby it would actually change a key in the registry to reboot the machine to safe mode before actually encrypting any documents. And this is purely to circumvent traditional EDR monitoring solutions. So when the machines are rebooted into safe mode, the drivers for these tools aren't running, and from there the blue teams or the SOC teams had no visibility over what was happening within their domain.
So an interesting sort of, let's say, under the radar kind of capability there for that one. Moving forwards, we talked about a widening skills gap as we use more and more advanced technologies. There's the sort of the widening gap in terms of people being able to understand and actually make sense of that, and actually be able to actively protect environments by understanding what's actually occurring on there. During the Sum of the World Economic Forum estimated that around half, somewhere between sort of 54% upwards of employees will require significant reskilling to address the skill shortages, and this needs to be done by 2022. In some areas, it's likely to be more acute, as according to the European Commission, as many as 37% of workers in Europe don't have even basic digital skills. So what we're seeing is that move from manual processes to using automation, but the skills aren't coming through to actually support that, and that's ever present in sort of the sort of cybersecurity space as well, with people actually understanding the latest and greatest sort of next gen capabilities and technologies in that sense as well. If we look at supply chain weakness, Michael, I think we talked to some of these bits already, but let's just go back through and actually look at where we're at with those.
Yeah, so we as Martin correctly said, we talked earlier about cloud technologies and the risks associated with them, but we've also seen from the data presented earlier in this webinar that third-party software and applications can also leave your organization vulnerable. As seen in the earlier 2019 attack timeline we showed, both ASUS and Microsoft Visual Studio were both attributed to perpetrators exploiting third-party access. So identified by Kaspersky Labs that as ASUS Shadowhammer attack, the attack actually leveraged a malicious version of one of the ASUS live update tools, a utility that kept the machines up to date, such as the BIOS or the UEFI drivers and applications. A malicious third party had actually included a backdoor Trojan in one of these update files that reaches out to a command and control server to download additional payloads. The code was understood to be relatively focused and only affected machines based on a certain MAC address criteria. And the malware was actually overlooked by a lot of security tools, as to a lot of these tools, the malicious file had a legitimate signature attributed to the ASUS digital certificate. Moving forward, we also saw in April the Microsoft Visual Studio. So in this instance, hackers had hijacked Microsoft's development tool, and once again they seeded backdoors into 3 video game companies that use the tool. As many as 92,000 computers were thought to be running malicious versions of the affected code base. Another strong example of a supply chain attack where the malicious code is seeded into software, and traditional tools are unable to pick this up as to them it's legitimate software.
So it's a really big challenge in ensuring that you don't just trust updates that come through, you actually check what those updates are, and actually understand what's going on, and some of that I guess is done through the monitoring, like what we do within our SOC, in terms of looking at those anomalies and actually viewing changes of state in capabilities between both now and what happened previously, and things along those lines, right?
Yes.
Okay. A couple more predictions that we got in here. So we predicted an increase in outsourcing of cybersecurity. What we said at the beginning of the year was that we felt that because of the cyber skills shortage and the need for comprehensive solutions today that address all of these challenges with bring your own device, with cloud, and actually understanding what's needed and what to look for in this, we thought there'd be an increased outsource to specialist organizations such as ourselves to actually address these pieces and actually give protection today moving forward. 2019 has been a challenging year across the markets, some of it because of the current political climate with Brexit and things along those lines. So whilst we've had interest, it's not been at the rate that we originally believed it to be. There's a lot of projects that have been delayed, obviously waiting for decisions and the like along those lines. But we have seen, an increase in actually, why would I do this myself? I get somebody in to water my plants and do all of that stuff. Why wouldn't I get somebody that knows what they're doing to actually look at my cybersecurity for me? So it's been an interesting year, not to the level that we want. We didn't really see that needle shift growth in outsourcing that we predicted across the market, but we certainly have interest in, a lot of prospects for 2020 coming through. Preventable data leaks, an interesting one here in terms of understanding, what was actually occurring and actually identifying it. Michael, do you want to give us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so identifying preventable data leaks, we've thought of it as, for example, theft of a personal device with sensitive data upon it, use of unsanctioned applications within a network environment, or even something as little as an employee sending an email to a sensitive email to the wrong recipient. In nearly all of the data breaches reported, there was actually evidence of these attacks or compromises taking place. The challenge that comes with that is having the time or the skilled resources and ultimately money to increase visibility. Also putting in procedures to improve controls across the enterprise and also limit exposure to sensitive data. If we go back to some of the incidents we saw this year, we actually had one where a user who'd set up access to a personal home NAS system from his office location, originally set up by the user to enable smoother transfers of files from when they were allowed to work from home. We're quickly able to see how users unknowingly can set up these unsanctioned applications, which can cause a bit of grief to the business. Luckily, in this context, it was a genuine oversight from the user, but as stated, this could have been abused by a more malicious or maybe a disgruntled employee.
Yeah, and I think the challenge here is, people do things in goodwill to try and make it easier to carry out the functions of their role and don't actually see those side effects, which could be quite severe. In that instance there, that could have been a really good example of data leakage from that person's home NAS device, as an example. Don't need to attack the perimeter of the organization, just go after that home environment. And away you go. So yeah, interesting there. And that NAS may have had a cloud share on it as well, subject to what sort it was. Increasing cloud-based attacks. So, Symantec predicted or reported that currently 53% of all workloads are in the cloud. And this is a figure that's been forecast to increase over the next few years at an ever-increasing pace. 2019, we've already discussed attacks against software that's utilized in a trusted form by end users. However, it's still the weak link here is the user. It's been reported that 65% of organizations who use infrastructure as a service capabilities don't use basic authentication or multi-factor authentication or put controls around who can access what. They simply don't understand some of those elements that are in there or don't consider them when they're actually spinning up these instances. Interestingly, in the survey, more than half the respondents in the survey confirmed that their cloud security practices were not mature enough to meet the demands of the growing use of cloud apps, and nearly 3/4 said they'd experienced a security incident in cloud-based infrastructure due to this immaturity. So, we're using the cloud more. I think there's a trust element, thinking, the big three, the big four, they've got it right. Indeed, that platform is secure, but what you put over the top of it is your responsibility to look after and ensure you have appropriate controls in place around that. And actually, without those controls, or if they're very basic, or you don't have any sort of privileged access management, then it's very quick for somebody to get in. So what we look at are things like CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers, that actually control access to those cloud environments, make sure you're tracking who's accessing from where, what they're doing. And also looking at sort of, say, privileged account management to actually ensure that the people accessing have the right credentials, the right privileges to actually carry out those tasks at that time. But yeah, attacks are increasing. They're focusing on those weak points we saw back at the timeline in terms of some of those databases that were available online without credentials in place, allowing people to harvest those records and do what they will with those without too much concern. The final prediction that we made at the beginning of the year was looking at an increase in the uptake of advanced intelligence and machine learning technologies. Michael, take us through this one.
Yes. So with more users come more ways to utilize the internet, and this also leads to an increasing number of logs. So in 2016, it was estimated that there were around 44 billion gigabytes per day of logs generated, and this is expected to increase to 463 billion gigabytes per day by 2025. Aligned with this increase in data is the reduction in the cost of storage. With more data being stored, it's a challenge for any organization to understand and actually interpret this data. It's very hard for a human to look through that mass amount of data and actually do anything useful with it. And this is where we're seeing a large uptick in the use of machine learning and behavioral analytics technologies. So more and more solutions are incorporating these next-gen analytics and automated approaches to data security. And what these are effectively doing are taking on that job of sifting through the data and only highlighting what is important within that data, or what is malicious, or what is benign. So this is still a fairly new sort of area to be in, but we definitely think there's going to be we'll see this continue to gather pace well into 2020 and beyond.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, we're seeing the start of a mind shift from the sort of the rules based, if A then B, alert to actually, like you say, taking that automation, that anomaly detection, and actually looking at things for anomalous reasons that may be benign, but actually could be a prelude to something more sinister. So definitely one to watch through 2020. So that's the end of our predictions in terms of what we looked at for this year. Really, what we wanted to do now was just look forward at a couple of things that we think are going to occur as we close off the year and start 2020. So, kind of following on from what we saw there with machine-based learning and advanced intelligence, or advanced data sets, it's actually a greater use of automation and orchestration. Now, this is something that we think is paramount. We do it within our Aspect solution at Cyberseer, and we make use of the technology to actually do that data sifting, that tier 1, that tier 2 capability, if we think of traditional SOCs, which means that what we get from the system is a series of contextualized and enriched data sets that very quickly our forensic analyst, Michael's team, can actually look at and actually make informed decisions on. And that's actually going to help reduce that sort of time to detect, that dwell time that's in there. As we said, with the increased data and the extended enterprise reach into cloud and looking at other things, these technologies will become ever more in demand. As simply, you can't keep up with the volume of logs that are going to come in without them. So this is something we think is going to get greater focus from organizations through 2020 and beyond in terms of that. Next one, ransomware. Michael, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so ransomware has been on the radar for many years now. Generally, we've seen a more spray and pray approach where it's just to email whoever you can, then hopefully someone clicks. But what we're thinking we're going to start seeing is actually more targeted ransomware. So this is either targeted on specific industries, specific technologies, or even specific certain geographical areas. A prime example of this being, I read an article the other day where it was saying that some ransomware distributors are choosing to target South Korean firms, purely because they've got a higher chance of paying a ransomware of the ransom fees, so it's more profitable for the attackers. Other signs of targeted ransomware becoming a thing is in November, a Spanish consulting and outsourcing firm called Everest were hit by the BitPayment ransomware, and a post-analysis of the incident is actually the encrypted files, that the file extension was changed to a sort of an obfuscated version of the company name. So it was, I think, Everest, but replacing the E's with threes, the I with ones. But it's a clear indication that actually attackers are specifically choosing certain companies and tailoring their payloads for those companies.
Thank you, Michael. Bring your own device. It's been on the cards for a period of time, obviously outsourcing that IT to the user. But actually, we think there's going to be increased organizational risk, potentially if the bring your own device policies aren't reviewing how users actually make use of these systems. We're thinking about the increased risk of data leaks, malware infection, exposure to vulnerabilities due to a lack of device management, because these users aren't maintaining best practice. There's nobody actually looking to ensure that everything's online and is actually functioning properly without having those processes and controls in place. So great idea, BYOD. I think it's one of those ones that there's going to be a sort of a change in approach to actually put more control around how they actually connect to the corporate network and actually carry out those functions with online applications and things along those lines. Phishing attempts, an interesting one, hot topic, Michael.
Yeah, so phishing attempts are still currently the #1 method that an attacker will use to compromise an organization. A study by Fish Labs actually found out that 90% of phishing emails contain no malware, but they were to do with credential theft or even more general email scams. Phishing, we're seeing a push towards the attackers actually doing a lot more research before just sending out these emails. So previously they used to be riddled with spelling mistakes from translation services. Actually, we're seeing the use of, say, industry specific templates now. So for example, those in the automotive industry will be targeted with text that would be believable to the reader. There's also some instances whereby attackers are actually using open source intelligence or LinkedIn to actually find the names of managers or CEOs, and then the attackers will use those details to make their attempts at phishing a lot more convincing.
Okay, no, thank you. I think the final one that we got looking at 2020, and it covers a wealth of different points that we've mentioned here. Cyber's been a topic that's been at board level for a while now, a fair few months, even a couple of years in there. But actually, we think that the CISOs are going to be invited to the board to actually make cyber more prominent. There's more and more reliance on the internet and actually the infrastructure for these organizations. And we think that the role of the CISO is crucial and is actually going to get that airtime at board level, because the board now understand the need to invest in these controls, in the security of their organization, to maintain the commitment to the shareholders and obviously to the security of the organization. So that's something that we think we'll see. The early signs are there's a few that have adopted this approach already, but we think we'll see more of this as we move forwards through 2020 and beyond. So quite a slight change to what we did this year. We've reduced the number of predictions down and made them more sort of encompassing on there. But in terms of how to prepare for 2020, Gartner's predicted through 2020 to at least 95% of cloud security failures will be the customer fault. We're talking about the human error, the bits that you don't know what you don't know, and it's a common cause for cloud misconfiguration in terms of not appreciating all of those other elements there. Ultimately, it comes down to having money, time, and resources to actually put adequate protection in place and understand the elements that are around the function that you're trying to achieve, and all those other bits that are there. So a continual review of the environments, an adjustment of the associated people, process, and technologies is the only way to both prevent and also monitor these solutions moving forwards. In terms of a few snippets, review points for 2020, staff awareness training. It was interesting. I was talking with Michael the other day around an organisation. Michael, you might want to jump in on this. That was actually making sort of cyber awareness and security not just the job of three guys in IT, but actually everybody's responsibility. Do you want to share a little bit on that?
Yes, I believe it was Maersk. They had a conference. I think it was, I believe it was at Black Hat actually, where they were discussing the attack they had on themselves, where they were hit with ransomware, sort of a post-incident learning process. And as part of that, they've actually rethought their whole company approach to cybersecurity. They've introduced, I believe, 5 principles. And really with the ideology that security is to become everyone's responsibility and not just that of the security team. Whilst the security team can provide sort of the guardrails and a technical resource throughout the company, that they're putting their hands up and saying, hey, look, it's not possible for them to be in control and see everything that happens or that users are doing. But by pushing say proper education, so as Martin said, staff awareness, and also the introduction of accountability across different departments, so it doesn't just once again fall on those three or four people working in the security team, but it's becoming to a sort of an end point or an end goal that security becomes a benefit and not just a burden across the business.
Thank you. I think access management controls, we talked about a number of issues where people had access freely or through very easy approaches to the data. So actually understanding that, looking at CASB for those cloud-based applications, looking at PAM to make sure that people are only accessing with those credentials when they need to safeguard your admins, really, in that sense. Access management controls is something that I think needs to be looked at and actually considered in the round with the expansion into the cloud and everything else. I think, review of the monitoring scope, inclusive of third-party and cloud applications. A number of times monitoring is put in place, but it doesn't review what it's actually there to do. And as time moves on, the monitoring scope and actually the direction of the business take different paths. And actually what you start to get is incomplete visibility. Therefore, you're opening up areas of risk where, compromise could occur and go unnoticed. And then you get back to the realms of previously, there was evidence in log data. It's simply that the log data wasn't being reviewed. So actually making sure that monitoring scope continually aligns is a crucial step and something that doesn't have to be done every day, but done periodically, be it quarterly, half yearly, however it's done, actually monitoring, reviewing that monitoring scope, I think there. I think the final one on here is sort of adequate password management. There's a number of things that people do. Interestingly, I had an email the other day about one of my home doorbell, talking about potential compromise of the accounts there and the importance of ensuring that the passwords are different and not shared across multiple applications, because had that password been compromised, then obviously if that was the same for every other account, it makes it very easy for a hacker to actually utilize that to actually get into other places with those compromised details. So password management and making sure those passwords are robust. A good example, take 3 non-related words and put them together, but then add in numbers instead of letters. So here we've got car, plane, horse, actually changing it to C4R P14N3H0R53 as an example. Just makes it more difficult for that password to be cracked using any sort of resources that are on there. Makes it a lot harder for people to get in. So that's sort of how we feel to prepare for 2020. Michael, is there anything else you want to add at this point?
Not from me.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's good. Thank you. All that remains is for us to, thank you for tuning in this morning and listening to this. And also from all of us at Cyberseer, want to wish you a Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year and hopefully see you in 2020. Have a good one. Thanks.
Thank you.